Hey there, welcome. I'm Marina Ormes, the founder of Astrology Heals, and I am here today with my good friend and fellow expert astrologer, Sheri Horn Hasan. Today, we're going to discuss with you some interesting astrological configurations that we have coming up as we head into the midterm elections here in the US, and it includes a couple of potent eclipses, including one on November 8th, the day of the election. So we'll be bringing you our insights today into what to expect. But as you know, astrology is a participatory sport, not just one where we passively sit and wait to see what's going to happen. So we'll also be telling you what you can do to help us all collectively manifest the highest possibilities for who we are and who we can become, both individually and collectively. And today we're going to share what to watch for as we head into the eclipses and the November election. It's a super significant year for the US with our Pluto return happening and some other things that are a big deal for the evolution of the United States. We'll tell you about the meaning of a square between Uranus and Saturn coming back into play, some planets going direct and Mars going retrograde. We'll try to make plenty of time to break down the different factors that we see in the election day, lunar eclipse, and the solar eclipse that comes 2 weeks prior to that. And Sheri and I are on opposite sides of the country, so we can balance each other out with East Coast and West Coast perspectives. But before we jump in, I'd like to introduce Sheri and let you know more about what we each do. Sheri and I first met about 10 years ago when we were both studying with Stephen Forrest, a renowned astrologer, and we hit it off, and we've been having some interesting discussions ever since. So thanks for being here, Sheri, and let us know a little bit more about you.
Sure. Thanks so much, Marina. It's so much fun to get together with you. I love having these chats. So I just to let everyone know, my name is Sheri Horn Hasan. I'm an archetypal, psychological, and evolutionary astrologer who believes that we all may move from chaos to clarity through astrological insight. And that's primarily because such insight allows us to understand that the universe is basically benign. And this is my philosophy. It has no vested interest in making any of us suffer. Rather, it provides us with opportunities every moment of every day to grow in consciousness. So it's simply up to us to recognize those moments and to learn from them to achieve greater soul growth in this lifetime. And my emphasis is on personal chart readings that help individuals gain greater insight about the soul conditioning from both early life experiences and past life karmic ones that causes so many of us to repeat the same patterns over and over again without recognizing where or how we need to make a change in order to achieve greater happiness and success in our lifetime. I'm also an Amazon #1 bestseller editor and author who's worked with approximately 160 different authors to help them self-publish, primarily in the memoir genre. And for some of them, I used astrological insight. We worked with their charts, which is really interesting. Plus, I'm a professional astrologer, but I'm also a podcaster. And my show is called Karmic Evolutions, Astrologically Speaking, which you can find at my website, karmicevolution.com. And I love to correlate the movements of the planets in the heavens with the events here on Earth to illustrate their impact on us all through the energies reflected back to us through the collective. No man is an island, right? Everything affects us. Now, these energies may or may not touch our own individual natal charts, but they still create the energetic environment in which we're living now. And so my mission revolves around providing my audience of listeners with as much relevant astro news you can use to help everyone navigate as successful a future as possible through astrological insight, one day at a time.
Beautiful. Yes, totally. We're totally in sync.
Yep. For sure.
And Yeah, and I forgot to mention that our topic here today is going to be, will women save democracy? So we'll definitely be diving in with current events and how astrology can give us insight into where we're headed. Just to let you know a little bit about me, I'm Marina Ormes. I'm a retired holistic nurse, and I'm an astrologer of almost 30 years now. I focus on astrology and holistic healing, which just means well-being in mind, body, emotion, and spirit. And so when we're well in our spiritual growth, it helps all parts of our lives. And I've written 2 books and a chapter in the anthology Nurse Sparks. My books are Cycles of Healing and Astrology Heals that you can read about at astrologyheals.com, or you can also find them on Amazon. For me, astrology is a tool for self-awareness and evolutionary growth. In my readings with folks, I focus on how their chart helps them grow and feel more empowered in their daily lives. I post daily self-care videos on my YouTube channel under the name Astrology Heals, with the astrology of unshakable self-care. And I'm definitely looking to grow my subscribers. So I'd love it if you would support me by subscribing if you haven't yet. And some of you might be meeting me for the first time. So that's a great place to learn more about me. So great, let's jump in with our topic today. And I was thinking that Sheri, maybe you could start us off with a review of what the Saturn-Uranus square is about, how it's showing up in world events, and how it's going to be important to us as we head toward these eclipses.
Sure. Thanks, Marina. Saturn is an Aquarius. As Saturn is about foundations, Aquarius is about groups and also progressive movements, right? So when Saturn squares Uranus, Uranus is the planet of unexpected change. And it's in Taurus, which is one of the most change-resistant signs you could possibly imagine. I'm a Taurus sun, trust me, I know. So when these two come together in a frictional square, right, there's a lot of resistance. And Saturn doesn't want to make the changes that Uranus says is necessary. But one of the things we've noticed, without going more into the rabbit hole of the signs that they're in so much, although Uranus has been since 2018 urging us to change our value system. And I think the most obvious one that most people can relate to is Venus. Venus's Taurus, to me, is like Mother Earth and the feminine divine cycles, right? And Marina and I both will know that this is part of our study, is the cycles, right? Yeah. The cycles of nature, and as seen through the planets and their cycles. So Saturn wants things to stay the same. It loves tradition, and it can be fearful about change. And Uranus is like, darn, come on, let's go. We got to send that rocket to Mars. I mean, what if we run out of food? Uranus is in Taurus. Taurus is about resources, So what I've noticed is that in 2021, these 2 planets came and squared exact 3 times, right? And then they kind of moved further apart. Now, when they first were together, we had things like the people going out into the streets. So the murder of George Floyd, for example, by a Saturnian police officer. I mean, you can't get more, because the Saturn is authority figures, right? And the group rising up and saying, no, that's not part of our value system anymore, dude. Like, you don't get it, so go with the times. So that obviously has we've seen all kinds of protests politically and all that at the end of the Trump era and all that, and the crazy stuff on January 6th, right? So what I've been seeing, and this is a little, the square is tightening now. It's not going to square exact again, but it's tightening, particularly between now, the end of September, and the end of October. And so
just to jump in there and remind people, that just means it's coming closer to exact.
Right. And it's not going to exact again. A lot of astrologers make, a big deal out of that, but the energy is still in the air, right? So this energy because Saturn square Uranus is rebellious, right? And it motivates people to take to the streets. So what the first thing that I noticed, which I thought was really interesting, which was peaceful, was all of the people who flocked to London for Queen Elizabeth's funeral. And that all happened within the last 2 weeks, right? She was laid to rest a week ago, or a little more by the time we air this show. And she passed like 10 days before that. So we see all these people coming out into the streets. Americans couldn't get airfare, they couldn't get air flights to go fast enough to London, so it was interesting. But what we've seen since then is, of course, and this was brewing as the square was starting to come back into tighter aspect. Okay. Square is always frictional, right? So is, of course, the Dobbs decision from the Supreme Court in June. And since then, the rise in women who are saying, no, you can't take away my rights, period. Whether you want to rationalize it because it was a law or it wasn't a law, I don't really care. We have rights, and the feminine divine knows that. And, Uranus and Taurus knows that. And that's just the way it is. Women are people, and women have the same and equal rights to men, so there's the rise in that, and the rise in registrations to vote solely on that issue, which, fingers crossed, right? Will they vote out anti-abortion candidates, or, will there be some kinds of action after that if they don't manage to do that, because it's the candidates who take office who are going to help codify what used to be Roe versus Wade. The other thing over the last 10 days or more about is the street protests in Iran. In Iran, a woman was murdered, so they say, allegedly, but, by the secret police or whatever, the religious police there, because she had a few strands of hair coming out of her hijab. And of course, women there, that government is what do you call it? Islamic and very strict and very patriarchal. So we see another repressive, but particularly misogynist, right? So, I have personal experience with Islam, and, having married someone of that faith, but my point is that it's not anything against the faith. It's it's against fundamentalism, just as it would be in any faith, So it's an interesting thing. And I think that this will come more to a head as we get closer to the October 25th solar eclipse, which will be, 2 weeks before the actual November 8th election. So, what do you see going on? Anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of paradoxical energies between Saturn being in Aquarius, which those are kind of opposite energies. Saturn being very organized and structured and dealing with authority, Aquarius being very rebellious and working outside the box. And then the same thing with squaring Uranus in Taurus, which, as you mentioned, pointed out that how that is Uranus being this energy of shift and change and unexpected developments, being in the sign of Taurus, values, beauty, earth, connections, feminine. And so there's just a lot going on. This is a very dynamic energy. And what you see is on both sides, those energies showing up. So you see some of the conservative right being radical, and some of the anti-establishment left being like, hey, no, actually, we have some good systems here. Let's defend them. Let's hold them up. And so some of those paradoxes are really present with us, and we have to be really aware of who we are and where we stand as we navigate this, tumultuous, I guess. Definitely, there's some instability, and this time where we are actively making choices. And I think that's why it's important, if you've had opinions before, maybe it's time to share them. If you've had thoughts or feelings, it might be a good time to connect with others who share those thoughts and feelings. And Aquarius, one of the things about it is the grassroots nature of it. It's activism, but it's also community. And communities coming together, feeling support, feeling that sort of normalization of here's what we're going through, and we can do this together.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. I want to point out too that, the two things that'll happen in the next week or two is that obviously Mercury is stationing direct on October 2nd, which is a little bit more, I think, it's not that it doesn't have its results in the mundane world or the outside world. Things will move a little more smoothly. Communication goes more smoothly. You can sign your contracts and launch your projects and things like that. But Pluto will also go direct on October 7th. And Marina had mentioned, you mentioned the Pluto return in the US chart. Okay, so that is ongoing and will be for a little while longer too. But I'm always mindful that this country has its roots in revolution, right? And the Saturn-Uranus square also is very much like saying, we don't want to be under a tyrannical system anymore. And just given what I just mentioned between Iran and women losing the right to choose what to do with their own bodies and in the realm of making decisions about their own health, because we can't forget, and I know that's a big topic with you, it's like, oh, I'm sorry, I don't have the right to decide to go to the doctor.
Right.
Or else the doctor, Saturn, is going to get thrown in jail. It's ludicrous when you think about it. I mean, if somebody was, these memes you see on Facebook with the space aliens coming down and they're like, oh, we got to leave. This place is too much of a mess.
Totally.
So,
yeah, right.
Yeah. And
Not
then
even
that
being able to, I've been reading stories of people who they don't want their doctor to know, they're holding information back from their doctor,
right. Because the doctor has to report it, right?
Right. They're advising their daughters not to reveal their last menstrual period, and
they're saying take them off the calendars that are online. Like if you use a Google calendar, oh my God, talk about like government intruding on your life. That's like 1984, right?
Yeah. I mean, and
crazy.
Just as a health, former health professional, imagine that there would be people not revealing key aspects of their health, and that has always been confidential and safe, and private. To worry about that. That's deeply concerning. So,
well, that's interesting too, because you're making me think about something we didn't really talk about, but we touched on, which is that, first I just want to say chronologically, right? Saturn's going to station direct October 22nd. That's a good time also for us to launch our projects and get on with things that we've already maybe been planning, and we spent some time reviewing and structuring, restructuring, reanalyzing. And then Jupiter re-enters Pisces because it's retrograde. But I want to get into that, or we can talk about it in a second. But where my mind was going was Mars retrograde, which stations on October 30th, which is 5 days after the solar eclipse on October 25th. And what Marina and I know is that a planet doesn't suddenly stop. It slows down over time. So leading into that eclipse, that Mars will be very slow, right? Which is antithetical to its nature. But vigilante law, right? Yeah. Because people turning in, what did they first say when the ruling came down on Texas, right? That ban would stand. It's like Uber drivers are supposed to report of a female that they dropped off at an abortion clinic. Talk about vigilante injustice, right? Injustice, so
right. Yeah. And Mars, of course, being the planet of action and movement and assertiveness and risk taking. So just to make sure everybody's with us.
No, Mars is our personal will. It's what causes us to, I always like to tell students that it's like when you're in your mother's womb, it's Mars energy, which rules the ascendant in the first house in the natural chart, without getting too technical about it, that sends the signal to the mother, I'm ready to be born now. I made a decision. Yeah, it was instinctive. I didn't think about it. It didn't come from my brain. It came from me knowing that I'm going to outgrow this place soon. And there's not going to be any place for me to swim.
Yeah.
I'm going to be sleeping and it could be uncomfortable. Let me get out. So that's the personal will that we all come into this lifetime with. And then it's about making choices. So one of the things is when Mars is retrograde, because it'll be retrograde for a while until January of 2023, is that we're all tasked with finding, this is, I think, particularly relevant to the topic of women's rights. It is, we're tasked to find our inner warrior. I do believe, like in Kansas, that there's a lot of women who would never have stood up against the abortion stuff if it wasn't so extreme. Mm-hmm. And then it finally gets to the point where they're like, yo, I have to speak out about this, you know, which they ordinarily wouldn't do. They'd be like, okay, fine, 15 weeks or whatever. Like they can live with that, you know, but the assault, that being so brutal and so total, and including the vigilante injustice, that, you know, this is a time when all of us can review that. And say, well, where do I really stand? You know, because it's not about me. It's about my sister. It's about my daughter. It's about my niece. It's about my cousin and their kids and whatever, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And as Mars, and I do want to, let's get on to the eclipses, but
sure.
Just one last thought about Mars, that it's, you know, I've mentioned, and I'm sure Sheri's been talking about this too, Mars having an extended stay in Gemini. Gemini is all about information and how we tell the story, what we're learning. And so details we're learning, so much going on in, you know, in the court systems and different things that are going on. But as Mars goes retrograde, we're gonna, that's gonna definitely, the forward movement will slow down. So like Sheri was saying, we're going to go back, we're going to review territory we've been over already. And we're going to reconsider how we are moving forward and what our strategy is and how we want to make decisions and how we want to approach things. And so that's what we've got to look forward to. And Mars is going to be, so it's going retrograde after the first eclipse, but before the eclipse that is on election day.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And the other thing that I just point out, which I have been talking about on my podcast, is, of course, it started before, but it really hits the news when Mars entered Gemini, which is I call it the war on education. The war on, you know, in some cases, transportation, anything with a Gemini theme, right? Oh, young people can't be taught critical race theory, even though you don't learn that until you're in law school. Yeah. If you go to law school, you know, when that first started, my son is a freshman in law school. He's like, yeah, we're learning critical race theory. That's where you're supposed to learn it. You know, it's like, hello. But the book banning, you know, these boards, and also I equate Gemini to local business. And in the context of looking at what's happening around us, and has been for a while, obviously, since the whole, you know, stop the steal BS has been in the air, is voting places, polling places. Yes. So a war on that, you know, we've had a war on words for a long time, and that's included in it. But the war on words is like, you can't read that, you know, and the voting polls and voting in the people who are going to promote doing injustices around our voting mechanisms, like the actual machines and things like that, or preventing people from being able to come in. And so I think we're going to see, you know, it's certainly not going to go away, you know, right. But to be conscious of it is to say, well, what can I do? Or how can I circumvent that? Or double check that I'm registered, double check that, you know, we've been through, Marina and I, right, the kids in college where they don't know where to vote. My friend's daughter was like, I voted in the place, I don't know, am I supposed to go where my college is? Or, you know, a couple of years ago, 2016, she was like crushed because, she, you know, we had to get her a special permission to come to the, you know, her home to vote there. So kids are confused, and there's likely to be that kind of confusion again. So checking it now, you know, is the way to go, right?
Yeah. So, yeah, so fortunately, Mercury will go direct. So we'll have Mercury moving forward, but then Mars goes retrograde. So
in Mercury's sign, right. Yeah. Yep. So what do you see in terms of, I just want to ask you, I mean, I have some things to say about the Jupiter-Neptune conjunction, but I'm wondering what you see in terms of, whether you're connecting the two eclipses as similar energies or whether you see them as, separate, even though they're only 2 weeks apart,
Yeah, well, they definitely, the energy from one eclipse to the next, from one, new moon to the full moon,
Sorry.
full moon to the new moon, it's all
That's my
connected.
telephone.
It's, yeah, it's all like, it goes, it's an evolution. I mean, that's what we do. We do evolutionary astrology. And so it reflects a development, a further development. You got something you need to take care of, or?
No. It's just my home phone, which is across the room. And I'm sorry, but that it has an uncanny sense of timing. And I always forget to take it next to me so I could just pick it up and hang it up. So, and it likes to talk in unintelligible English. So,
oh yeah, good.
This is how far technology's come, right?
It's Mercury retrograde, saying hello.
Exactly. That's like one of 35 things since Mercury went retrograde, and the least of them. So trust me.
Yeah.
Anyway, my apologies.
No, we're good. So we have the solar eclipse on October 25th in Scorpio, which Scorpio is it can feel scary just because it's so deep and so powerful and so intense. But really what Scorpio is about is transformation. And so it's allowing us, giving us this opportunity to let go of the old, make way for something new to be birthed. And that Scorpio energy is powerful because we're letting go of something. There's a kind of symbolic or actual death, and it's conjunct Venus, so that brings in that Taurus Uranus energy. And we have again the themes of values, of how we care for each other, how we relate to each other, and that going through transformations, and then as we head into the November 8th, there's so much to break down about that. We were just touching in on it a little bit in our chat yesterday, but and so many different components that have meaning. But one of the things that's happening as we head into the November 8th is that the sun and moon will be aligned with that Saturn-Uranus square.
Right.
That's why we opened with that, to give you the context and the background for what this upcoming election day eclipse is going to be activating.
Right. Totally agree. I'm sorry, did I interrupt you?
Yeah, no, go ahead. We'll just
go back and
forth here.
Yeah. I was looking at, and I'm pretty detailed, so without getting too much in the weeds, on October 25th, the eclipse is at 2 degrees exact of Scorpio. And as Marina said, there's a stellium, which is more than 2 planets in the same sign. So it's the sun and the moon, which always come together at a new moon. And in this case, it's a solar eclipse new moon. And they conjoin, or they meet up with Venus, which is, of course, the planet of harmony, but also, as I said before, Venus rules Taurus and Libra. So it's the physical and the social side of relationships. And what I had jotted down here, which is interesting. So first of all, just some basic stuff. There are different astrologers who believe different things, and I try to combine them all together in order to help people make the most sense, right? Bill Meridian, an astrologer who's pretty well known, wrote a book a few years back about eclipse energy tending to manifest thematically within about 3 weeks before the actual eclipse. So since eclipses run in pairs, and here there's two weeks apart, if you actually want to take that literally, I would say if you start keeping your eyes and ears open around October 5th or so, which is going to be right after Mercury stations direct and Pluto stations direct on the 7th, to, just keep your eyeballs peeled for what might be going on or emerging even in your personal life, because this is going to happen in the house where you have Scorpio in your chart. But the eclipse also, because it's Scorpio, and because Venus is involved, there can be, I think, transformation, like Marina said, for sure. But Scorpio and Taurus, or I mean, Venus is obviously in Scorpio, so that's a combination that can be rather manipulative. So I call it but in a sweet way. Okay, it's usually not like violent. It's like I call it the iron fist in the velvet glove kind of energy. So because we're leading up to, this is 2 weeks before an election, I would say, and we're all mindful of what happened with James Comey back in 2016, that pretty much destroyed Hillary Clinton's campaign with his release about whatever BS it was about our emails that didn't come to anything, right? So, but change scared a lot of people, right? That I think that, Pluto, which rules Scorpio, is also about societal reform. So given what we're saying, with those women out in the streets and women coming to vote and saying, different states reporting right now how much of an increase they've had in women registering to vote, women who might, are young and don't care about it because they're too young, even though they're 18, or other women who just said, I don't care. But now this issue is galvanizing people. So I think that, that could lead to the kind of societal reform, but that would be, that remains to be seen. I'm trying to see what my notes are. So hang on a second.
Yeah. And again, just to remind people, it doesn't mean we should be scared of what's going to happen. It means we should be awake and aware and ready to respond. And that doesn't mean that each individual person, or you might feel like, well, what can I do? I'm just one person. But it's really just about you being one part of the whole, and the way that you respond in your family, in your community, to bring that light of positivity, of saying, we need to not be in denial. We need to acknowledge what's going on, and then we need to just be clear about who we are and take action where we need to take action. And for some people, that's like going out into the streets or pounding on the congressperson's door. And for other people, taking action means having a conversation, or, being kind to someone in the grocery store because you're helping people figure things out for themselves. So, all of it is important. I talk about that's a lot of what I talk about, but all of the ways that we can respond are contributing to the whole. And the more we can take care of ourselves to bolster our own ability to be positive and present and clear and able to respond, the more we can affirm, and be part of the positivity and create those positive outcomes.
Yeah, I totally agree. The only thing I would add is that in this instance, in the United States of America, right now, I think action is necessary. And that while I wholeheartedly agree about conversations with people and relearning in this country, the art of debate, right? While Mars is going backwards in Gemini, like, let's listen to each other. But that I don't think you have to be, because, my understanding is that a lot of conservative women throughout the country don't perhaps consider themselves feminists, right? And I got no beef with that. But the thing is that it's not feminist to think that women should have equal rights. Like, anyone who thinks that's just some feminist agenda at this point in time, and it doesn't, what's been going on doesn't motivate them to get an absentee ballot, even if, like me, you're lazy and you don't want to go to the voting poll anymore on the day of, or we just had 2.5 years of pandemic. So it's okay. Get your absentee ballot. Nobody has to know how you vote, or show up, and advocate in those conversations at the grocery store that woman who's going to vote should take her 18-year-old daughter, or whatever. So, but the other thing I want to say is that I think you alluded to the the Saturn-Uranus square tightening here. And as we said, through this whole month, it will still be tight on November 8th for the next eclipse, but that is a rebellious energy. So what I wanted to add to the conversation is that because I see the solar eclipse, the sun, the moon, and Venus coming together in Scorpio as a rather peaceful, but kind of underhandedly manipulative energy. So it's sort of like, what I mean by that is like, come on, honey, come to the polls with me. We'll go out for dinner afterwards. Let's go to your favorite place, Like, I know you don't care, but I do. So I need you to vote. I mean, I'm not talking about coercing people, so don't get me wrong. But especially if you're dealing with younger people. So there's that. But at the same time, we have some other energies that are going on. And you alluded also to, waking up, don't be in a reverie and believe everything you hear. And Mars is going to form a square. We are actually having a Mars return before this October 25th, which is usually a kind of volatile time. Mars is in the 7th house in the US chart, which means that we may be, as a nation, a country that tends to not I'm not talking about this the past couple of years, right? Things have changed, but we may project our own animus, our own anger onto other people. So they act it out for us. I'm not angry. You're angry. You're the one who's yelling at me, but it's triggering a square in the US chart, which is a Mars Neptune square, which I believe from my studies of psychological astrology, and of course the country isn't a person, but I do think you can still look at the basic energies, is that the fantasy often proves better than the reality. So fantasizing that Biden's not our real president, fantasizing that someone like Trump or DeSantis or you pick whoever, is going to ride in on a white horse and save us all, is something I think we're asked to come to terms with. And the other thing is there's an aspect here between Mars and Pluto, which is a more minor one, but frictional. And when those two get together, there can be violence. Now, I'm not predicting that, but I'm kind of saying that I think women will do the job of peacefully protesting, getting people to the polls, being poll watchers or whatever. A lot of those jobs are taken by females, right?
Yeah.
And that there still might be some minor scuffling of the not so peaceful kind, right? Yeah. It makes me think of the Million Women March, right? When women marched, and I was there, there's no violence. Yeah. Hello, there's a lot of rhetoric, but there's not a lot of violence.
Absolutely. And that Venus conjunction during the Scorpio eclipse on October 25th, another thing that is strong is for women's power, right? Venus being the feminine and Scorpio being about power, and how that power is maybe different, and how, like what you're saying, how it shows up in different ways. It might be like, no, we're just quietly going to go take care of this problem.
Right. Yeah. Right. and also, if you think about it, it's kind of like a new moon.
Yeah.
Is a seed planting time.
Yes.
And with Venus here in this equation and so close to the US midterm election, it's like saying the seed planted will be the mobilization in a sense because of the Uranus-Saturn square, right? Because this isn't the only issue in the US that needs attending to. It's one of the major ones, and I'm talking about women's rights, but it's not the only one, right? So if we plant the seeds now for transformation, more towards the, just in this instance, equal rights, but it goes with that Saturn-Uranus square because it's saying, well, we have to rebel in order to get reforms that will benefit us. And it's female driven.
Yeah. And another interesting piece is this Jupiter retrograde. And I think you were starting to touch on this earlier. Jupiter during the October 25th solar eclipse in Scorpio, Jupiter is in the very, very, very beginning of Aries, which is Jupiter brings expansion to whatever it touches. So it's bringing expansion to that warrior energy, potent Aries energy being in the first degree. So very good for activating courage, faith, belief in your actions, and belief in your ability to make a difference. And that belief is, of course, the source of what will unfold. And then Jupiter, the planet of beliefs and faith and optimism, continues retrograde into the last degree of Pisces, where it will be for that November 8th eclipse. And that Pisces energy, very different, it's that universal connection to, our interconnectedness, how we transcend the everyday world, but also the world of fantasy, the world of illusion, the world of conspiracy theories and confusion.
Right.
And that it's also very potent being in the last degree of Pisces, which, many ways we look at it, Pisces is the last sign of the zodiac, coming back to the beginning again at 0 degrees Aries. So this interplay between the first degree of Aries, which is that will to live and to birth yourself, that will to come into the world and bring forth whatever it is you have to bring forth. And then that Pisces energy of release, of letting go, of dissolving, and really potent energy of like the last moment before the rebirth.
Yeah, I agree with everything you've said. My take is a little bit more like devil's advocate, right?
Yeah.
Because I always like to look at the opposite potential manifestations of the same energy, right?
Right.
And 100% agreement. Jupiter is about our beliefs, right? And it has particular connotation with philosophy and also religion. So Jupiter, and I alluded to this before, when Jupiter conjoined with Neptune in Pisces, which is the first time they've done that in 166 years, because Jupiter Jupiter meets up with Neptune regularly, like every 12 or 13 years, but only every 165 or 6 years in a particular sign. So the last time it did this was in the mid 1850s, which was the period leading up to the Revolutionary War, right?
Civil War.
I'm sorry, the Civil War, right? But what I noticed, they conjoined together in Pisces on April 12th of this year, 2022, right? Which is approximately a year and a half after the election in November of 2020. And that's what started the whole big hoax thing, right? And when you look back in history, and I find this particularly fascinating because I looked it up, that was the period 166 years ago when these two sisters in some small town in a house in New York State, upstate New York, decided that there were spirits knocking on their walls and that they could communicate with spirits, right? So the interesting part about that is that they became famous. It led to the spiritualist movement, but years later, it was the first time, apparently, and this is what gripped the collective psyche, is that humans here on Earth could communicate with spirits, that spirits from the beyond were benign, and also that they could communicate to us positive things like what's happening or what might happen. So these two gals were debunked as hoaxers. Okay, so the word hoax is what caught me because I looked it up like on Wikipedia and I looked for some other articles and I thought, wow, that's fascinating. So what do we have by the time these two conjoined again in Pisces is this big hoax about the election, right? Yep. So to me, Jupiter, when it moved into Aries, is somebody willing to fight for the cause of their particular belief. We have crazy people like Lauren Boebert, who is on a video clip saying that the Constitution does not call for separation between church and state. I mean, the woman, no offense to anyone, but the woman is insane. And I don't think anyone who's listening is going to, I don't know, but, if I turned off one of your people, I'm sorry, but I got to tell it like it is. So this conjunction has led to a lot of fantasy. And when I mentioned the Sibley, which is the US chart, that's what it's called, that's what it's known at, the one that most of us use, has a Mars square Neptune. Neptune is fantastical, and Jupiter is really kind of righteous, Right. So in Mars, there's this very righteous energy. The government shouldn't be separate from the church,
Yeah.
and then all of the people on our side are like, well, tax the church then, stuff
Yeah.
like that. So this is all going on at this crazy time.
Yeah.
And when Jupiter goes back into Pisces, I'm not really sure what's going to happen, because I think maybe it'll lessen some of that motivation of Mars. But the other thing that's happened with that energy since Jupiter went into Mars too and this conjunction is the weakening because Neptune dissolves things and Jupiter is higher law.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a constitution. That's the highest law in the land. And we all know about, how the Supreme Court its popularity has plummeted, especially since June, and so this is the kind of stuff that I think is in the collective that we can also think about, because, if you're going to fight, make sure you know what you're fighting for, right?
Yeah. And just speaking to the, coming back to the idea of the US going through its Pluto return, we didn't really explain what that means. It's really, Pluto has a 244-year cycle?
I think it's 248. Yeah, 248? It's elliptical. Okay. So yeah.
So human beings don't have a Pluto return because that's how long it takes to come around back to the place where it was when you were born. But a country can, live that long. So what Pluto return would bring is a return to this energy of death and rebirth. And the question really is for us, will we transform and emerge in a new form, or will this be the end? And I think, the thing that's really important to me to convey is that we're not sitting here waiting to find out what's going to happen. We are actively creating this. This is our story. And so, and I appreciate your perspective, Sheri, about, yes, we have to take action right now. Like maybe we could have gotten away with just quietly standing back in the past. And that's part of what is happening as women come into their power, is that the places where we have held ourselves back and said, oh no, nobody cares what I think, I'm not important enough, I don't have the value, and we need to recognize that we actually do. And
I vote the way my husband
does. Yeah. And there's so much more to it, right? The subtle ways that we unconsciously silence ourselves. And so just finding our voices, getting more clear about who we are, getting more clear about what we need to do and say and how we need to be in the world. That's a lot of what this is about. And so, there's no reason to give up. Sticking our head in the sand is the opposite of what needs to happen right now. And people talk about hope, and hope is there if we create it. So, I really think
absolutely. And Jupiter is hope. Yeah. Jupiter Pisces is hope. Yeah.
And there are plenty of stories that we can reinforce that hope in the news, stories of things working, things happening, going the way we want them to go. And so we can bolster ourselves with those stories, but also remind ourselves that even though you feel small, what you do is important. And
totally agree. I'm going to interrupt you because we only have about 7 minutes left. I just want to ask you, because we didn't fully touch on the November 8th eclipse, which is when the moon is opposite to the sun, but we see that the Uranus-Saturn, it forms, like you said initially, a T-square. So what's your take on, do you think there'll be some surprises that day or what?
Gosh, do you think?
I know, but I don't let myself contemplate what they could be.
Well, absolutely. The moon is within a degree of Uranus. Uranus is the planet of unexpected developments, sudden changes, instability. Also, breakthroughs, freedom, new discoveries, innovations. So there's always both sides. And I think, you know, Sheri always says I have rose-colored glasses. So we have maybe these different perspectives. And then they're both important to bring out, really.
Yeah. Well, hope is important. I mean, the rose-colored glasses, you know, I like to say Neptune is the planet, and when Venus and Neptune get together, or that in whatever combination, that's the rose-colored glasses, right? Which is a romantic. But we have to, as Stephen Forrest tells us, you know, we have to be able to dream. And in the seeds of that dream, which is the chaos, comes clarity, right? So there's always a positive potential. It's staying stuck in that Mars square Neptune, you know, US kind of personality. That's one of the parts of our personality as a nation in general, that we could just think that we have, you know, infinite amount of, you know, whatever, right? You know, and infinite amount of money and infinite amount of land and infinite amount of people can fit here and all that. So it's, you know, people could be in for a little bit of a shock when those rose-colored glasses get some like mud splattered on them, you know.
I don't know what you're talking about.
I know. It's tough, you know, but it's one of, I have Venus in Pisces, trust me. I know. It's like we have to look for what part we played in it. What part we played in self-deceit.
What is there, right? And what is there to learn? What is there to
always
learn?
Always. Yep. Because I think you know, the only thing I would say is that you know, in mundane astrology, the moon represents the people. And so since, as you pointed out, the moon is conjoined to Uranus, or meeting Uranus in the sky, and they're both being opposed or opposing the sun, and Venus is kind of thrown in there too, then, you know, and squaring Saturn, that we have a lot of resistance here. And the people will be like, no, I need something different. We need something new. And is that going to be to their detriment or to their benefits? And that's where I think the question mark remains. How many people are laboring under a fantasy, and how many are factually, you know, my money is on the facts, you know, that people, more people, and with the help of women who actually factually know, factually know, right? We don't have to live in one of those states. As Marina said, I'm bi-coastal, and I'm in, you know, I grew up in New York. I'm in New Jersey, so I don't have to worry, you know, but because they're tightening the laws here in New Jersey, where I live, to benefit women. So, and the right to abortion, but
and truth is power. Right. The truth ultimately, you know, is what history will look back at. And one thing I wanted to add too is that I think this is a chart that is significant enough that this election will be historical. I mean, I think that what we're heading into, we have our perspective now of like, we're living this, we're, you know, biting our nails and seeing what's going to happen. But what is happening is significant to the country, to our identity as a nation, to what democracy means. And, you know, we were looking at some of the things happening in the coming years, and this is not going to be over by any means, but this is a powerful moment to plant our flag in the ground and say, this is who we are, this is what we want, and we're not compromising.
Right. And I'll point out, and then we have about 2 minutes left, so we can each say goodbye to everyone, and thank you. But I noticed too that we are in the lunar return, the US. Okay, that's of 27 and a half years, the moon, progressed moon. For those of you who don't understand it, just understand that there's themes that resonate for about 27 and a half years. And that's going on right now. But the other thing is that means that for those of you who are more astrologically savvy, that we will be having in this country a Saturn return in about 2.5 years. And when it does, it's going to square our sun.
Mhm.
So, Saturn coming back to Saturn, Saturn is square the sun in the US, chart. So, as Marina said, this is not over. And, it remains to be seen. But in the last minute and a half, I'm going to say thank you so much, Marina, for inviting me to this chat. I'm hoping we get back together again, maybe by the end of the year, if not before, and take a look at what's coming. And if anyone is interested in my podcast, again, it's at karmicevolution.com. You just go there. That's the homepage. There is a downloadable also from Stephen Forrest, How to Keep Your Sun Sign Happy, a little 2-page thing that just has some general advice for everyone. And you can find the podcast there. But anyway, namaste and thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Always a pleasure. I love our time together. And you can learn more about me at astrologyheals.com. And I, again, really appreciate anyone who can jump on over to YouTube and find me at Astrology Heals. Just type in Astrology Heals YouTube and hit subscribe, because that will really help me get the word out. And thank you so much, everyone, for being here. You are, so much of why we do this, and many thanks. So we'll see you next time. Thanks for being here.
Take care, everyone. Thank you.